What experience of yours is so crazy you don't tell people about it because they wouldn't believe you? Story 1. When I was younger, I worked at a popular theme park in the UK as a ride assistant. One of the rides I worked on was the river rapids. Two young visitors, who had clearly been drinking, got on, and it was obvious they were going to cause trouble. As their raft came towards the end, they both started running around the outside of it. The raft hit the wall, and they both fell into the water. This was near the lift section of the ride, which, if they had been caught in it, could have injured them severely. I ran down and somehow managed to pull them both out. They were quickly escorted to the medical center and, I assume, off the park. That same day, after finishing work, I went to see a friend for a few hours. On my way home, I was behind a car that was swerving all over the road. The car hit a curb and flipped onto its roof. I stopped my car, ran across, pulled the doors open, and got both occupants out. They were the same two people I had pulled out of the water earlier that day. Story 2. Once, when I was 8, I was climbing out of the bathtub after showering. Since I was wet, my mom wrapped me in a towel, which covered my hands as well. I ended up tripping over the edge of the tub and fell face first onto the floor, where I just lay there for a second in a daze. I tried to get up, but blood was flowing down my face from a cut on my head and my nose. Nearby, I had a bucket of crabs. This was at a seaside resort, and it tipped over, spilling them onto me. They pinched me all over, so I started rolling on the ground trying to get them off. My family was frozen in shock. After being rescued from the crabs, my nose bled for 3 hours, and I was sent to the hospital, where it turned out my nose wasn't broken. My family still refuses to acknowledge it ever happened. Even though I have the hospital bracelet from that date, it's still one of the strangest things I've experienced. Story 3. Back in high school a few years ago, I had a photography class with my best friend, and we went to NYC to take pictures for an assignment. We were walking through Times Square, where people are always handing out flyers or promoting shows. A friendly young woman got our attention and started talking to us about a book. I can't remember the name. Then she said she knew someone who could explain it better and asked us to follow her. She grabbed our arms and led us down a street, which turned out to be the location of a Scientology church. At the time, I had no idea what Scientology was and was just curious. As soon as we walked in, a group approached us. The girl told them we wanted to join, and their faces lit up. A man led us down a hallway saying, "We have a special movie for you." We were taken into a small room with about 20 chairs and a screen. He said the video would last 30 minutes and then left, closing the door. When we tried to leave, the door was locked. The video talked about how everyone has untapped abilities and how to activate them. When it ended, the doors were unlocked and they asked us to fill out contact forms. We declined and left immediately, heading to Midtown Comics to recover from the experience. People have asked why we didn't just refuse from the start, but honestly, it happened so fast we didn't realize how strange it was until we were already in that room. Story 4. Once, as a landlord, I had to break up a gathering of 18 people in one of my units after noise complaints. When I arrived, the occupants barely opened the door and were oddly dressed, and there was a strange haze in the air. I needed them to sign my report for documentation. They asked if everyone should sign it, which confused me. Then they turned on the lights and I realized the room was far more crowded than allowed. By building rules, only 7 people could be in a unit at once. I had to end the gathering because of the occupancy limit. About 15 people left at once, in varying states of undress, clearly unhappy. I went back to my office to write the report, adding more detail than necessary. The next morning, my manager told me the owner wanted to speak to me. To my surprise, the owner said it was the most entertaining report he'd ever read and asked me to write more in the future. Story 5. 8 years ago, when I was 10, I was walking my dog with my father. My dog stopped and urinated on the wheel of a Mercedes-Benz. A few minutes later, the same car slowly drove past us, turned around, and passed us again. This time, the driver shouted angrily at us without much explanation. After yelling for about a minute, he sped off. As we returned to our street, we saw the man walking toward us. He pulled out a weapon, pointed it at us, and shouted repeatedly about my dog. My dad became furious and shouted back. The man fired but missed, and my dad rushed at him, managing to tackle him to the ground. I ran to get my mom, and we called the police while my dad held him down. The police arrived and arrested him. We later learned he was a well-known criminal in the area. That's the story of how my dad, unarmed, stopped a dangerous man. Story 6. When I was 21, I was going through a very lost and stressful time in my life. I'm not religious and don't really believe in spirituality or the paranormal, but I kept having sleep paralysis episodes that felt incredibly real. The visions, the panic, everything felt right in front of me. An elderly neighbor heard from my mother that I was experiencing this, so she had me call a man who apparently was known for dealing with unusual experiences like that. He told me to go through my room and every night before bed, firmly tell whatever might be causing it that it wasn't welcome and had to leave. I decided to try it, hoping it might help. After doing this once or twice, I woke up one late morning, unable to move. I looked up and saw two strange figures in my room, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, filled with clicking sounds and solid tones. They noticed I was awake, and one slowly came toward my bed. Without speaking aloud, it placed a thought directly into my mind. If you would like, we can show you your past, present, and future. It wasn't spoken. It was like a loud thought I couldn't ignore. I still don't know exactly what it meant, but I managed to weakly shake my head and say, "No, thank you." They both left, and I never had another experience like that again. I'm still not fully convinced it wasn't just an intense hallucination, but it was unlike anything I've experienced before or since. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had said yes instead. I usually keep this story to myself because I know how unbelievable it sounds and would have trouble believing it myself if someone else told it to me. Story 7. I was 20 and tutoring some of the football players at ASU. Some were brilliant, others less so, but all of them were good people. It was my birthday the night before, and since my 3 students who lived on campus had all passed the tests I'd been helping them with, we decided to celebrate. I didn't know what celebrating meant to them until that night. These guys could handle large amounts of alcohol, and I was no match. I was very slim at the time, about 129 pounds. So after several shots, I was already feeling overwhelmed. They had even given me the nickname Matty the Mouse, because I was the smallest one there. Hours later, they challenged me to drink a strong spirit called Everclear. I lasted about 2 seconds before leaning over the balcony and getting sick, unfortunately onto a group of people standing below. They came upstairs looking for Red, the unofficial leader, demanding I be handed over to fight. My friends refused, knowing I was peaceful and not looking for trouble. They left, but about an hour later returned with more people, ready for a confrontation. I later found out I had accidentally gotten sick onto one of their phones during a call, and even into the mouthpiece, which understandably made them angry. Tensions rose, voices got louder, and it looked like it might get bad, until one of my friends offered them a peace gesture in the form of sharing something to help everyone calm down. They accepted, I apologized repeatedly, and it ended without a fight. My friends still tell this story to people whenever I meet someone new. Story 8. My boyfriend's dog once ate about 1.5 pounds of chocolate rum balls that our house guests had bought and left in their room while we went out for breakfast. We came home to find a very unwell corgi and far more mess than a dog that size should be able to make. To make matters worse, it had been raining heavily for days, and the community's old sewage pump failed. Since we lived at the lowest point, sewage water backed up through both toilets into our home. Our guests were horrified, apologizing even though it wasn't their fault, and they had to leave for a flight. My boyfriend rushed the dog to the vet, leaving me alone with 2 bathrooms full of waste and a living room covered in the dog's mess. I cleaned it all by myself, threw away my clothes, and took a 2-hour shower. The smell was so bad I lit every candle I had and used more cleaning products than I can remember. Thankfully, the vet said the dog would be fine after being kept overnight for observation. That night, I finally went to bed relieved the day was over, until at 6 a.m., I was woken by an unpleasant sound and smell. My chihuahua, who sometimes has stomach issues, had gotten sick right next to my face while I slept. My boyfriend had already left for work, so I cleaned it up, only to walk into the bathroom and discover the toilets had backed up again. It was truly one of the worst days I've ever had in terms of bad luck and bad smells. Story 9. It was my friend's 21st birthday, and we decided to go out for drinks in Minneapolis. It was a Monday, so we figured it would be quiet, and for the most part it was. We first went to a karaoke bar but left quickly because none of us wanted to sing. At the second bar, we met 2 friendly men who took a liking to the birthday girl's friend. When they learned it was my friend's birthday, they bought our group, 6 people in total, a round of drinks. I offered to get their next round, but they refused, which was the first sign they were quite well off. They continued buying rounds until our group, now 8 people including them, was in high spirits. Then one of them mentioned that their favorite club was nearby, and we were invited along. When we arrived, before even being asked for ID, the man who suggested it showed the bouncer a special card, and we were escorted to a private lounge with table service. The 2 men ordered premium drinks, and the birthday girl chose one of the most expensive options. Our new friends happily covered the bill. Later, they even handed us a large stack of singles to give out during the performances. We had front row seats, and the atmosphere was full of energy. Suddenly, the birthday girl felt unwell and had to leave. We caught a bus back to our car and went home. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and found that every pocket I had was stuffed with singles, over $100 worth. It turned out everyone else in our group had the same surprise, making it a memorable 21st birthday for all. Storyton. When I was 11, my aunt was visiting. I lived with my mom, my other aunt, and my 2 sisters. My visiting aunt's baby son, only 6 months old, was getting fussy, so I offered to take him to my room to play for a while. Eventually, he got restless again, so I went to return him to his mother. In the hallway, our washer and dryer were tucked into a closet. While I had been in my room, someone had left a laundry basket in front of the dryer. I tripped over it, and my cousin flew out of my arms. Time slowed as I caught myself, lunged forward and grabbed him just before he hit the floor. Everything went silent for a moment. My younger sister was staring from the couch, and my aunts were frozen at the kitchen table. Then the baby started crying, and my aunt rushed over, thanking me and laughing from shock and relief. We told my cousin this story years later, but he didn't believe it. My aunt once joked about it years afterward when I tripped slightly while holding my own child, saying, "You're clumsy, but I know you won't let that kid hit the floor." Story 11. My father was adopted and passed away when I was very young. His adoption was closed, but my grandparents were told some details about his birth parents, including their professions and country of origin. I always assumed these details were made up to make him feel better. Earlier this year, my aunt and cousins were doing DNA kits, so I decided to research the profession and country I'd been told about. Within a minute, I found a man who looked exactly like my father. My entire family was shocked. This man was famous in his country and had won major awards. I contacted him, and he confirmed that his child had been placed for adoption without his consent. The dates matched, and the resemblance was undeniable. He told me he had expected his child to find him someday. We spoke for about a month, but communication stopped. He had other children, and I suspect his wife wasn't comfortable with the situation. I only wanted to meet him because I never got to know my father and had questions about my heritage. He was kind and seemed truly saddened to learn of my father's passing. Story 12. I turned 21 on a Wednesday during midterms. Most of my friends had exams the next day, so I went out alone to have my first legal drink. I rode my scooter into downtown Savannah on a cold January night. After searching for a while, I found a bar on the riverfront that was open. The neon open sign glowed against the fog-covered cobblestone street. I walked up to the doorman, who towered over me. Without speaking, I handed him my ID. He checked the time, handed it back, and said in a deep accent, "Happy birthday, son. Welcome." Inside, 3 servicemen and the bartender cheered. An hour later, the doorman joined us for drinks. 2 of the servicemen invited me to a club nearby. We arrived just after a show ended, and I spent the evening talking to the bartender about an old relationship. The next morning, I woke up in my dorm with dollar bills scattered on the floor. When I went back the next day to retrieve my scooter, the staff explained they had stopped me from riding home after drinking, pooled some of their tip money to pay for a cab, but only if I danced for it. I must have done well because I still had cash left over after the ride. Story 13. In 2007, when I was 16 and my sister was 17, we were working a Sunday shift at a supermarket in a small Australian town. Along with another coworker, it seemed like a normal day until a distressed man in his 30s came in. He tried to buy a lighter, but his card was declined. Then he tried to get a small box of matches, but couldn't afford it either. After asking an acquaintance in the store to buy them for him, and being refused, he returned to the register, saying he'd bring money later. When told no, he pulled out what appeared to be a gun. He demanded that someone get him the matches, and my sister, the front-end supervisor, was called over. I dropped down behind my register the moment I saw the weapon. My sister stood between him and the cashier, insisting she wouldn't give him the matches. Then, in an unusual approach, she told him, "It's not cool to have a gun. You could just put it away and live your life." Surprisingly, he nodded, put the weapon down, and left. The gun later turned out to be a very realistic imitation, and the police apprehended him soon after. They warned my sister never to confront a weapon again and told her she could have been seriously hurt. The man received community service and rehabilitation, but no jail time. To this day, people don't believe this story when we tell it, but it happened exactly that way. Story 14. I was in Washington, D.C. on vacation, staying at a hotel that happened to be hosting a large conference that weekend. The lobby and elevators were packed. My cousin and I, carrying our bags, didn't want to wait for the elevators and decided to take the stairs. We didn't realize that the stairwell doors in hotels like this usually only let you out on the ground floor to prevent people from bypassing security cameras. For some reason, the door to our floor was unlocked when we first arrived, so we dropped our bags in our room and went back down to get the rest. When we returned, however, the door to our floor was locked. We tried door after door going down, but each one was locked, even the ground floor. At this point, we started to panic. We were trapped in a stairwell with no cell reception. At the bottom, there was one unlocked door marked staff only, leading to another set of stairs going down. With no other option, we went through and found a corridor that eventually led to another stairwell going up. We kept checking floors until, on the 7th or 8th floor, we finally found an unlocked door. But instead of the hotel, it opened into an office filled with cubicles and ringing phones. We closed it quickly, went up another floor, and found the same thing. On the 9th floor, we decided to take a closer look. That's when I saw a huge portrait of George W. Bush. This was around 2005, with a sign reading, U.S. Department of Homeland Security and Immigration Services. Now, very nervous, we decided to find someone and explain ourselves. The first person we encountered was a large security guard who looked stunned to see two 16-year-olds in street clothes. When I said, "I think we're lost," he replied, "You absolutely are," and led us to a secure elevator that required a fingerprint, code, and keycard. Another guard was stationed inside at all times. They took us to the ground floor, where there was another guard and an airport-style security checkpoint. This guard also seemed alarmed, and we were taken to a room for questioning. After 2 hours of explaining exactly how we had ended up there, they let us go. I think they were embarrassed that two kids had accidentally bypassed Homeland Security and didn't want to report it higher up once they knew we were harmless. When we left, we asked where our hotel was, and they pointed halfway down the block on the other side of the street. The underground tunnel had taken us farther than we realized. My grandparents were upset and didn't believe us at first when we finally met back up with them. Story 15. I had a summer job going door to door asking for monthly donations for various charities, though I'm fairly sure it was a scam. The fun part was that we traveled and spent each week in a different city, and my coworkers and I didn't take the job too seriously. One week, I was sent to a city known for its history involving witchcraft. I didn't know much about it, but a friend had told me some things. One evening, I was knocking with a coworker who was very spiritual. It was getting dark when we came to an older rundown house. An elderly woman answered the door, and the atmosphere changed immediately. It was my coworker's turn to speak, but he didn't start, and we all just stood there staring at each other. I tried to take over, but stumbled over my words. We were wearing badges and carrying pamphlets, and the woman reached out to take one from my coworker without breaking eye contact. Then she reached out again to shake his hand. He hesitated, but gave a quick, limp handshake. She said, "It was very nice to meet you," then reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded pamphlet of her own. She tried to hand it to him, but he stepped back. At that moment, I thought, why are we still here? I quickly said, "Have a good night. We'd better get going," and pulled my coworker away. A few houses later, I asked him what had just happened. He suddenly started crying, which scared me, and I began to cry too. When he calmed down, he said, "Something was wrong there. I don't know what, but something was wrong. She wanted me to take that pamphlet so badly, and when I didn't, I felt like her eyes were piercing right through me." I knew exactly what he meant. Her stare was unsettling. Later that night, I learned that all my coworkers, including him, had eaten a large number of edibles before starting work. I had too without realizing it because the chocolate bar they gave me was one. To this day, I don't know whether the encounter was really as strange as it seemed or if it was just two people, very unprepared, interrupting an elderly woman's evening while under the influence. Story 16. Back around 2006, there was an animated web series gaining popularity for the time, and I was active on its forums. I created a character in the show's art style and posted it there. The creator, who also participated on the forums, asked if they could use it in an upcoming episode. I agreed, asking only to be credited. A few weeks later, the episode came out, and not only was the character included, but it became central to that episode and the next. The series was soon picked up by a larger website, which funded many more episodes. My character became a regular feature, appearing in the intro and functioning as the series mascot. Yet my name never appeared in the credits. When I contacted the creator after the first episode, they said it would be too much trouble to re-upload just to add my name, but promised to include it in the next one. They never did, and shortly after, the show was picked up by the variety site. At that point, I gave up. Years later, I found the series still active, and my character still in use. The original forums had been deleted, and I no longer had the original drawings, so there was no proof I had created it. I tried reaching out to the creator again, not for money, but for acknowledgement. I never received a reply. The series is mostly inactive now, but the old episodes can still be found. It's just disappointing to know that something I contributed to in such a significant way was never recognized. Story 17. When I was 14, my aunt passed away, and the atmosphere at home became tense. I stayed with my uncle for a while, as we shared similar personalities. His girlfriend at the time claimed to be a medium and surprised me by telling me personal things I had never shared with anyone. She explained that she had recently performed a ritual to release a spirit from the house, and that it left behind a kind of energy vortex in the spot where she had done it. She told me and my cousin to stand there in turns. When I did, I felt as if gravity shifted. I could see myself slowly turning in circles, even though I felt like I was standing still. My cousin experienced the same thing, and even lost his balance. It was my first spiritual experience, and it left me curious. Later, I introduced friends to her. Many were skeptical, but some left in tears after speaking with her. She revealed things about them I had never known, even though I was close to them. Over time, I became more private about sharing these experiences, realizing that they can't be fully understood by someone who hasn't experienced them firsthand. My late aunt's son was taken to live with his father's side of the family, which was devoutly religious. Years later, as an adult, he reconnected with me, and surprisingly, he's now one of the few people I can talk to about these experiences without judgment. Story 18. I bought an old used car and wanted a repair manual since older cars often need fixing. I found one online for $10 and arranged to pick it up. When I arrived, a woman answered the door. We started chatting, and she explained the manual had belonged to her ex-husband, who had recently left her. She was cooking at the time, and when I complimented the smell, she invited me to stay for lunch. I accepted, and while we ate, the conversation turned more personal. She spoke about her recent breakup and how hurt she was. I offered some comforting words, and she became emotional. Before I knew it, she hugged me, and our interaction took an unexpected romantic turn. Afterwards, while she was in the shower, I left with both a meal and the repair manual, which she forgot to charge me for. It was an unusual afternoon, to say the least. Story 19. One night at 3 a.m., I was at a donut shop near San Francisco when I saw two cars collide outside. At first, it seemed like an accident, but then one car rammed the other twice more. I called 911 and headed to my vehicle to leave when a woman jumped out of the car being hit and ran toward me with her dog. She claimed the people in the other car were trying to kidnap her. I told her to get in my car, and I sped away, weaving through residential streets. While I was still on the phone with the dispatcher, police arrived. The woman's story kept changing, from being targeted herself to someone trying to take her dog, and the officers appeared skeptical. One suggested I take her home, but another decided that wasn't appropriate and arranged to transport her instead. I returned to the donut shop, and the police came back to question me, implying something didn't add up. My story matched my 9/11 call, and eventually they left. The next morning, I discovered a white crystalline substance all over the back seat and in my kids' car seats. At first, I thought it was laundry detergent, but my wife recognized it as a large quantity of crystal meth. Looking back, it explained the officer's suspicion and why the situation felt off from the start. Even though my intentions had been to help, it left me in an awkward position, trying to convince others that I had simply been a good Samaritan in the wrong situation. Story 20. When I was 18, I worked the night shift as a desk clerk at a state park lodge, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. One snowy night, two of my friends joined me, and we stayed up playing cards and talking. There were no overnight guests, and I was the only employee in the building, which sat alone on a mountain with a view over the park. My car was the only one in the parking lot, and we were certain we were the only people inside. In the early hours of the morning, we heard a heavy fire door upstairs slam shut. These doors are very solid and couldn't have been moved by a draft. A moment later, another fire door further down the hallway closed just as loudly. There were only two ways into the upstairs guest area, so I sent one friend up each route while I stepped outside, where I could see both entrances. No one came out except my friends, and there were no tracks in the fresh snow apart from our own. We never found an explanation for what caused the two doors to open and close in succession. However, there's a local story that the park was built over a Native American burial ground. I worked many shifts afterward, but it never happened again. Story 21. One day I went for a walk around my neighborhood. I've lived in the same house since I was a child, and I was 17 at the time. Shortly after stepping outside, I rubbed my eye because something irritated it. When I opened my eyes again, I felt a sudden drop in temperature, about 30 degrees Fahrenheit. The bright day had turned into late evening, and the sky was now overcast. Looking around, I noticed things had changed. A tree I'd been standing under was gone. My neighbor's yard, which had been covered in concrete for years, was grass again, and my dad's work van was replaced by the older green one he used to drive. My mom's old car was in the driveway, and the street light near our house, which hadn't worked for about 5 years, was on. All these changes matched how things had been 5 years earlier. When I looked at our house, the garden was missing many of the plants my mom had added in recent years. I glanced up at my old bedroom window and saw a boy sitting on the windowsill. He was short-haired, heavier, and looked about 12 years old. Then I realized I was looking at myself. I blacked out, and when I came to, I was back in the present, lying on the concrete. I remembered that when I was 12, I used to sit at that window on my birthday, waiting for guests. I even faintly recalled once seeing a fit, long-haired man walking toward our house, looking at me, and then collapsing before vanishing. Thinking about it now still leaves me feeling weak and unsettled. Story 22. About 6 months ago, I was on a train from Rondebosch to Woodstock when it broke down in Salt River. After half an hour of waiting, people began getting off. As I was walking toward the platform, a man passed me and said, "There's someone dying over there, and no one seems to care." I couldn't ignore it, so I went to look and found a man lying on the grass, badly injured. He was trying to breathe, shaking slightly, with a broken arm and a severe head wound. I called the police, ambulance, and local authorities. The response shocked me. A staff member said it was his own fault, and another said he was the fourth injured person they'd seen that week, and it was only Wednesday. The police arrived an hour later, took no formal report, and only agreed to call an ambulance when I became visibly distressed. My husband arrived and stayed with me while we waited. 2 hours later, as we reached our car, we saw the ambulance finally pull up. I don't know who the man was or if he survived, but I think about him every day. Story 23. When I was about 11, I fell off my bike and cut my palm just above the wrist. It hurt badly, so I pulled my sleeve over it and started heading home. As I checked the wound for dirt, I noticed something strange. It looked like blue liquid was coming out. Alarmed, I pressed a tissue over it and hurried home. By the time I arrived, the blood had turned red, including the stains on the tissue in my sleeve. My parents didn't believe me when I told them about the blue color, insisting I was making it up, but they agreed the wound was bad enough for a hospital visit. At the clinic, I told the nurse what I'd seen, but she said it was impossible and suggested it must have been paint from my bike, which was neon pink. Even as an adult, whenever I've told the story, people laugh and say it's impossible. The only explanation I've considered is that it was related to oxygenation, but I know what I saw. I still have the scar today, and I rarely mention the incident anymore. Story 24. On my 19th birthday, I threw a party at my new house. I had a fake ID at the time, so I bought plenty of drinks. Working as a server meant I knew a lot of people, so I told everyone to bring whoever they wanted, a mistake I wouldn't realize until later. The first few hours were great, but someone brought a 15-year-old who had never had alcohol before and ended up taking an entire bottle of rum. While everyone was dancing, we suddenly heard a loud scream from the bathroom. People rushed over to find the girl thrashing wildly in the shower curtain, almost as if she was having a seizure. Friends managed to calm her down, and it seemed things might go back to normal, until she broke free, ran to the table where all the drinks and glasses were, swept everything onto the floor with her arms, and bolted for the deck railing. Fortunately, people outside caught her before she could go over. As this was happening, my then-girlfriend started yelling at me in the middle of the party. She stormed out and moments later hit a pole with her truck. Not injured, but her vehicle was wrecked. Back inside, we got the girl onto the couch to calm her down again. She seemed settled until she grabbed 2 drinks and poured them over my vinyl record collection. She was restrained once more, and we called her mom, who was surprisingly casual about the situation. While trying to arrange getting her home, another guest, let's call him AJ, started to spiral. He was upset, convinced his girlfriend was cheating on him, and left the property to vent his anger. Unfortunately, he came back more agitated, pulled out a knife, and began threatening to harm himself. My best friend, realizing the danger, tried to talk him down. When AJ moved in a way that put my friend at risk, my friend, trained in combat, lifted him over his head and slammed him onto the ground, knocking him out cold. Back inside, one of my roommates, nicknamed Sour, was chasing people around with a broom, shouting at them to leave him alone. Meanwhile, the girl, now nicknamed Demon Girl by some guests, tried to smash a glass bowl we had given her in case she got sick. Someone caught her arms just in time, and we decided to take her home immediately. On the way, she reportedly tried to bite the driver on the neck, and he had bite marks the next day. As this was happening, my neighbor came to the door, saying he'd heard multiple screams, breaking sounds, and had seen someone lying in my yard not moving. He asked if he should call the police. I told him we had it under control, though in reality we didn't. The night continued with more people having breakdowns, others shouting at me for direction, and chaos happening in every corner. It was without a doubt the worst birthday I've ever had, but it made for quite a story. Story 25. In November 2018, my boyfriend and I went to Thailand for what was supposed to be a 2-week dream vacation. On our 6th day, we visited the party district in Phuket. I didn't realize until that night just how strict the laws were regarding certain substances. We went to a club, and a performer handed me something to smoke, telling me I could light it inside. My boyfriend advised against it, but I went ahead anyway. Moments later, security took it from me. As we tried to leave, a group of guards blocked the exit, pushing my boyfriend around and calling the police. The club's owner came out, and when I tried to speak to her, they accused me of touching her and dragged me away. My boyfriend got protective, and the guards jumped him. He ended up having a seizure on the ground. Police arrived and took us to the station, telling us to contact our embassy. The embassy offered no help, saying we were on our own with the local legal system. We spent 4 days in jail and paid around $30,000 in legal fees to avoid seeing a judge. Instead, we were flown to Bangkok for immigration processing, told we'd be sent home in 2 days, but that didn't happen. We were held for over 3 weeks, separated, just waiting. Conditions were overcrowded, with up to 150 people in small cells. My boyfriend bribed guards to see me, and we discovered we had both been mistreated. He had been stabbed, and I had been assaulted by some guards, something I never told him. One day, desperate for help, I began praying in Arabic, a language I speak fluently from my upbringing in the Middle East. This caught the attention of other detainees, and I was brought to meet the detention leader, who also happened to be the leader of my boyfriend's cell. We discovered mutual acquaintances, which built trust. They moved us into a cell together, gave us beds, and ensured we had better food and protection. When our release paperwork came through, I took copies of theirs as well. After leaving, I contacted their families and used my connections to resolve their documentation issues. Within months, they were free after years of being stuck there. Their families turned out to be influential, and eventually my boyfriend and I even found ourselves in Kuwait's parliament, discussing security and economic planning. It was a surreal ending to what had begun as a nightmare. Story 26. Growing up, I went through a lot of difficult experiences, but whenever I tried to talk about them, I was often told I was making it up for attention. Even as a 6-year-old, when I confided in a teacher, I was dismissed. My mother would deny the things that happened, then later tell me with a cruel smile that I deserved them. School was especially hard. The bullying and mistreatment were extreme, and no one truly stepped in to help, except for one staff member. He did his best to look out for me, but I think his support for me hurt his standing with other staff members, and eventually he left. Without him, things got worse quickly. What made it even harder was seeing how differently others were treated. When a younger girl experienced similar problems, her family got involved, and the school took immediate action, walking her to class, sitting with her during lessons, and making sure she was safe on her way home. None of that had been done for me. I still wish I could find that one staff member who tried to protect me and thank him for everything he did. During those years, he was the only reason I managed to cope, and when he left, everything spiraled. The fact that so many of my worst memories are dismissed or denied by others makes it all the more painful. Story 27. When I was 17, my sister passed away from leukemia. Her illness came on suddenly and she died just 4 months after being diagnosed. She was a huge fan of the singer Beck and had bought tickets to one of his shows long before she showed any symptoms. Sadly, because of her illness, she had to miss the concert, which devastated her. She gave her ticket to our older sister, who went with a friend. What happened that night is something I will never forget. While my older sister was at the show, I stayed with my sick sister at the hospital, trying to keep her company, though she remained very down. Visiting hours were almost over when she looked at me and asked, "Do you think older sister's name is having a good time?" I told her I hoped so. Just then, her phone rang. It was our older sister, shouting with excitement, "He's here with us!" My sick sister was confused, so our older sister calmed down and explained that she had waited outside the venue and got the chance to meet Beck. She showed him a photo of our sick sister, told him about her situation, and asked if he would speak to her. He agreed. She handed him the phone, and my sister put it on speaker so my parents and I could hear. My sister told Beck how heartbroken she was to miss the show, and he reassured her, wishing her well and telling her he hoped she'd get better soon. She was beaming, happier than I had seen her since her diagnosis. We were all in shock, watching her talk to her musical idol. They chatted for a couple of minutes, and he ended the call with Godspeed. When she hung up, we all sat there asking, "Did that really just happen?" It was the happiest I ever saw her. A few weeks later, she passed away. Every time I think about that night, I cry. It felt like it was meant to happen. Story 28. When I was in year 6, I had a friend, let's call her Amelia, who often seemed a bit out of it, but I never thought much of it. One day, she invited me for a sleepover at her house, and the next day we planned to do a photo shoot in the park. I arrived at her house and everything seemed normal. We spent a couple of hours hanging out, talking, and feeding her many pets. She even had a shed full of them. Later, as it got close to dinner, her mom made us something to eat. Afterward, Amelia and I stayed up to watch one of her favorite shows, and her mom stayed up with us. About half an hour in, Amelia's younger brother appeared at the top of the stairs, and both Amelia and her mom freaked out. They grabbed me by the arms and moved me to where I couldn't see the stairs. Her mom told her son that I was suddenly very sick and throwing up. I had no idea what was going on, so I stayed quiet and played along. Once he went back to bed, they acted like nothing had happened, and we continued watching TV. When the show ended, her mom disappeared for a while, and we didn't know where she'd gone. Amelia and I went to bed, but just as we were falling asleep, her mom came into the room wearing a strange black outfit. Amelia looked embarrassed and asked her to leave. But before she did, her mom acted inappropriately and then walked out as if it were nothing. The next morning, we went downstairs to find her asleep, head first into a Sunday dinner. I panicked, wanting to leave, but Amelia just laughed and brushed it off like it was normal. Her mom woke up after a couple of minutes, went upstairs to change, and came back down to do my makeup for the planned photo shoot. She was behaving oddly, and looking back, I'm certain she wasn't sober. I was ready to call my mom to pick me up. She kept asking me strange questions, laughing hysterically at my answers, and making me feel even more uncomfortable. I've never told anyone besides my twin brother about that night, and even he doesn't fully believe me. It still unsettles me to this day. Story 29. This isn't my personal story, but my uncle and aunt's life together, especially my uncle's, was extraordinary. Most people don't believe me when I tell it. My aunt and uncle met in the early days of the internet in a chat room. She was in her early 20s and he was 35 years older. He's now in his 80s. In fact, they shared the exact same birthday and birth year as my aunt's mother. After months of talking online, my uncle invited her to sail the world with him on his sailboat. She left her life in Canada behind to join him. My uncle's life before meeting her was incredible. Born in South Africa, he had traveled extensively by sailboat. On one trip, he fell in love with a young woman whose family owned the largest coffee supplier in the world. She was wealthy, and together they sailed for months, visiting remote locations and even living with African tribes. As a gift, one tribe gave them a pair of otters. When they eventually docked in Georgia, USA, authorities discovered the otters were a protected species. The woman bought a large piece of land and registered it as a sanctuary so they could keep them. They lived there for years, breeding the otters to help repopulate the species. When their relationship ended, she moved back to Europe, but left my uncle the farm and offered him a generous, lifelong monthly allowance. He chose to accept only $2,000 a month to live simply, which continued until about 2 years ago. My uncle eventually sold the farm, kept living on the property while helping the new owners, and worked on restoring his sailboat. That's when he met my aunt online. Once the boat was ready, they set off together, sailing for most of the year and taking short breaks on land. They faced pirates, met people from all over the world, and had many near-death and life-changing experiences. They later returned to Canada, bought a farm, and settled down. After more than 20 years, their relationship ended, but they remain friends and still talk often. My aunt now sails with her new husband, while my uncle lives in British Columbia. They're even working on a joint book about their adventures, half told from my uncle's seasoned perspective, and half from my aunt's as a newcomer to the sea. Story 30. One day, my friend and I were riding back from a store with his dad. It was a clear, sunny day. No unusual weather, nothing strange in the air. My friend sat in the passenger seat, and I was behind him in the back. As we passed a fire hydrant on our right, I saw something bizarre. For a split second, the top half of the hydrant wasn't connected to the bottom. It hovered about 1.5 feet above it, slightly to the side, with a strange, colorful distortion in between. Mostly yellow mixed with the colors of the surroundings. Then right in front of me, the two halves seemed to snap back together instantly. I thought maybe I imagined it, but my friend suddenly said, "Did you see that?" We described what we saw, and it was exactly the same. To this day, we're convinced it was a glitch in the Matrix, and we still talk about it years later. Story 31. I had a one-night stand with a waiter in the city. He was fun. It went well, but we never exchanged any contact information. 2 weeks later, I was heading back into town when I got a call from a girl I had sold a concert ticket to. She said the will call wouldn't accept her. I went to help her sort it out, but during all the running around, I lost my wallet, which had my train tickets in it. That meant I had no way to get home. I ended up sitting on the curb with 2 bags, unsure what to do, when out of nowhere someone ran off a bus. It was the waiter. He saw me sitting there and asked why I was alone. I explained my situation, and we spent the day together until a friend found my wallet at the concert area. Nothing had been stolen. 2 weeks later, I was back in the city again. After a night of drinking, my phone died. My hotel key was with another girl from our group, and I couldn't get in touch with anyone. I went to the hotel, but no one was in our room, and my name wasn't on the booking to get another key. I stepped outside to buy a charger, and there he was again, the same guy sitting in a cafe at 3 a.m. studying. I knocked on the window and asked if he had a phone charger. Luckily, we had the same kind of phone, so I hung out with him until my friends finally got back to me. Story 32. When I was in first grade, it was almost the end of recess when I noticed 2 boys walking in the opposite direction of the classrooms. One boy was crying, and the other was helping him walk. Curious, I decided to follow them to see where they were going. They headed toward the school gate, which was slightly open, and walked right through it. Security wasn't very strict back then, so it wasn't unheard of for kids to slip out without being noticed. I hesitated because I knew we were told not to leave school grounds, but curiosity got the better of me and I followed. As I trailed behind them, I noticed details of the neighborhood I'd never seen before. About halfway down the street, they spotted me. At first, they were upset, asking why I was following them. I told them I was just curious and promised not to tell anyone, so they relaxed and introduced themselves. Let's call them Denver, the one who was hurt, and Kyle, his friend. Kyle explained that Denver had been bullied all day, and at one point the bullies kicked his leg hard enough to hurt him. He had told Kyle and asked for help getting home. We decided to work together to help him walk, each of us supporting him on one side. Thankfully, the injury wasn't serious. After walking about 3 kilometers, we arrived at Denver's house. He thanked us for helping him, and Kyle and I headed back to school. Before we parted ways, he thanked me again and said if we met again, we'd play together at the playground. I returned to my classroom and quietly crawled under my desk to avoid being noticed. A classmate saw me and told the teacher, who scolded me for hiding under the table. What the teacher didn't realize was that I had been gone the entire time. Everyone assumed I'd just been hiding under the desk all along. That misunderstanding ended up saving me from a trip to the principal's office. Story 33. When I was in college, my friend and I decided to go kayaking in the Laguna Madre. We lived in Corpus Christi, Texas, and had a free day from classes. We parked near the causeway and planned to explore the small islands in between. You could paddle up to the docks and chat with people if you wanted, or even visit nearby restaurants. On weekends, it was usually busy with plenty of people around, but since we went on a Wednesday, it was much quieter. As we were exploring, a scruffy-looking man waved us down from an old boat. He offered thirsty mermaids some beer. My stranger danger alarm immediately went off, but before I knew it, my friend had agreed to get on the man's boat for a bush light. I didn't want her going alone, so, against my better judgment, I went with her. Once on the boat, we met another man, and I swear he had a parrot on his shoulder. They handed us unopened beers and told us to make ourselves at home. I was frustrated with my friend for putting us in what felt like a risky situation, but the scruffy man turned out to be funny, and the captain began telling us stories, like how he once got shot because of his ex-wife, and how much he missed his teenage son after a bitter divorce. He even had a megaphone he used to yell at passing boats to slow down, calling himself the Wake Police. We ended up hanging out with them for a couple of hours before saying we needed to head back. They were polite and helped us back into our kayaks. When we returned to our friends, we told them about our pirate friends. Some didn't believe us, and others scolded us for trusting complete strangers. About a month later, I was watching the news and saw their boat, the Gypsy 2. It had vanished with the captain and a teenage passenger. The shocking part was that the boy apparently wasn't really his son, and they had taken off without the mother's permission. They were last seen off the coast of Louisiana, and no one has seen or heard from them since. I went to my friend's place to show her the news story, and we were in complete shock. We kept telling everyone, "That's the pirate ship. That's the one we were hanging out on about a month ago." I'm still not sure if anyone fully believed us. Story 34. When I was 15, I met 2 girls at the beach. About a year later, one of them added me on MySpace. We talked on the phone occasionally and became somewhat internet close, even though she lived about 8 hours away. Fast forward to my senior year of high school, and I felt like we were good friends despite not having seen her since that day at the beach. One day, she told me she was feeling deeply depressed and was thinking about ending her life. Alarmed, I decided I had to go see her, without even questioning why I had never heard anything about this before. I went to the bank, pulled out some cash, told my parents I was staying at a friend's house for the weekend, and set off on the drive. Things quickly started to feel strange, though I didn't realize how unusual it all was until much later. I got a call from an unknown number. It was a friend of hers telling me to meet them at a Walmart off of Cortaro because Haley can't be home right now. Oddly, I still hadn't been able to reach Haley directly. I arrived around midnight. The nearly empty parking lot had only a few cars, and one girl was standing outside one of them. I walked over and asked if she was Annie, and she said, "Hey, you must be my name." She told me Haley was inside getting a few things, which seemed strange because her friend wasn't with her. Annie was holding a half-empty water bottle and asked if I was thirsty. Without thinking, I said yes and drank some. She told me Haley had been having problems at home and just couldn't take it anymore. I suggested going inside to see her, but Annie kept saying we should give Haley space. I grew impatient and insisted, explaining that I had just driven 8 hours. At that point, everything became hazy. The next thing I remember, I was in my car, parked on a random suburban street. I had around $250 when I arrived, and all of it was still there. Hours had passed, the sun was up, and I couldn't reach Haley. I tried driving home but was so exhausted I fell asleep and crashed my car. To this day, I have no idea what really happened that night. Story 35. When I was younger, a few friends and I used to climb onto Old Man Frederick's shed and jump onto the trampoline in the neighboring yard. He would usually come outside and yell at us to stop, and we'd run away. One day, my mom caught me climbing the shed and pulled me aside, telling me I should ask his permission. She explained he was very old and that it was rude to just climb up without asking. The next time I decided to make my own version of asking permission. I ran to his front window, saw him sitting on the couch watching TV, waved, and ran back to the shed. I didn't know if he saw me, but I figured I could claim I had waved right in front of him. We jumped for hours and he never came out. The same thing happened the next day. I waved at him through the window and then jumped on the trampoline. All week I repeated this routine and he never said a word. I figured he had decided to let us be. That weekend, everything changed. I woke up to see police and paramedics swarming his house. My mom told me Mr. Fredericks had died. His son had come to visit that morning and found him still sitting in front of the TV, but he had been killed. Someone had broken in and struck him with a bat. The sounds of us playing all week had been echoing through an empty house. They never found the killer, though some valuables were missing. We never jumped on that shed again and moved the trampoline to another yard. Over the years, the place started to feel eerie. Rain seemed to fall only over his lawn, leaving a wet patch surrounded by dry pavement. At night, if we walked too close, we thought we heard shuffling inside. I eventually moved away, but 2 years ago, while visiting old friends, I slowed my car near his house and could have sworn I saw the flicker of an old TV in the window. Mr. Fredericks may have died, but it felt like he never left. Story 36. In high school, my friends and I would sometimes go for drives in the valley, hanging out, drinking, or just enjoying the freedom of having cars. One night, we were driving up a one-lane road that led to a larger road with a mountain on the right. As we crested the hill, we saw something strange. Orange lights on the mountain, arranged at different heights but perfectly spaced, moving in a slow upward spiral, like the DNA helix animations everyone sees in school. There had to be over 100 of them, stretching thousands of feet into the sky. We decided to drive up the mountain for a closer look, but the road wound through trees, blocking the view of the top. Halfway up, we hit a road closed sign with 2 large wooden barricades. This road had been open just days before. We turned around and went back down, but when we reached the bottom, the lights were gone. As we tried to figure out what we had just seen, we drove back toward town. From the top of the mountain road leading in, we saw heavy smoke and flashing emergency lights. The main street was blocked off, so we took a side road past a baseball field, just in time to see 3 large black Chevy SUVs with government plates and tinted windows speeding toward the valley. Farther down, we saw a car on fire in the middle of the road they had just come from. No emergency vehicles, no bystanders, nothing. We stopped for a moment, stunned, before deciding to keep driving toward the center of town. There we found the source of the smoke, a house fully engulfed in flames, surrounded by dozens of fire trucks and police cars. Sadly, we learned a man had been trapped upstairs and didn't survive. The car fire was never mentioned in the news, only the house fire. I stopped telling people about the SUVs and the strange lights. Most just look at me like I'm imagining things. But I still have no idea what we saw that night. Story 37. My friend had just broken up with a guy, and we went to get her things back. The guy suggested meeting us at a park, so we went there. When we arrived, he had a friend with him, and he immediately started attacking her while the other one came at me. I pushed her ex away from her and suddenly got kicked hard in the face by the other guy. My adrenaline was pumping, so I tackled him to the ground and started throwing punches. While I was fighting, My friend and her ex were in a heated screaming and pushing match. This went on until I let the guy I was fighting get up, and then they went to their bags and started throwing her belongings all over the park. I went to stop them, but that's when her ex pulled out an actual hatchet. He must have thought he was just meeting with my friend, who's a short, harmless-looking girl. He started coming after me with it. At first he wasn't swinging, so I thought he wouldn't actually use it. But as soon as I stepped closer to try to grab it, he began swinging wildly. I was basically running backwards, trying to dodge him, while his friend followed and my friend screamed. Just when I thought I was about to get seriously hurt, my brother appeared from across the park, yelling at the guys chasing me. That made her ex put the hatchet away, but it made the other guy turn his attention toward my brother. They looked at each other, ran up and hugged, talking about how they hadn't seen each other in years. It turned out they used to be best friends. My brother managed to convince them to just leave. It's not like we all suddenly became friendly, but it went from a life-threatening situation to a strange reunion in seconds. The only reason I'm okay is because that moment completely shocked everyone out of that rage. We eventually gathered my friend's things from all over the park. Story 38. When I was a kid, I had access to a lot of movies a 4-year-old probably shouldn't have been watching. Films like Gladiator, The Last Samurai, Troy, and other war or military movies. After watching enough of them, I decided it was my life goal to become a military leader and conquer the world. My school looked like something out of a horror film. It was in an old car factory, and the warehouse where they used to store the cars was our playground. Concrete floors, steel bars on all the windows, and metal hooks hanging from chains on the ceiling. We didn't have much to play with. On a good day, we'd use a bottle cap as a football. The boys' favorite pastime was fighting, and it became such a big part of the culture there that huge brawls would break out between 60 or more kids on different teams. When I discovered this, I made a plan. At recess, I went to the leader of one of the biggest and most respected fighting groups. He was in 5th grade, a 1.5 feet taller than me, and much heavier. It didn't end well. He broke my 2 front teeth. Fast forward a week, my first day back at school after getting my teeth fixed, I walked straight up to him. I pinned his foot with mine, then stomped down on his leg with my other foot so hard that I broke his femur. He had to wear a cast for 9 months and was never able to walk properly again. This all happened in the middle of the warehouse in front of the entire student body. By the time I left that school, I had built a team of 140 boys aged 6 to 9. I trained them using fighting moves I found online and called them my Legion. One day I decided to stage an escape from the warehouse. There was a massive iron gate they would shut behind us to keep us from leaving, so I gathered my Legion and we hit it with full force. The teachers couldn't hold us back, and by then the rest of the students had joined in. Over 600 kids poured out of the warehouse like a shaken soda can. After that day, they never made us play in the warehouse again. Instead, we got to use the large parking lot where finished cars were stored before being shipped out. It might not sound like much, but at least we had more space and sunlight.